Hi, everyone. Thank you for all the joiners. We're going to wait a little bit of time until everyone joins. And then we start with the introduction and we take the webinar forward.
Oops. Move this way, that's better.
I can see a lot of attendees joining us. We are happy to have you here from all over the world, Canada, UAE, KSA, Egypt, US. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for sharing your hellos on our chat room. So I'm going to start with the introduction. So hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to discuss the art and science of child development. My name is Nadine Musallem from Parent App, and I will be your moderator today. This webinar is brought to you by Parent App, and for those who may not know, Parent is a communication tool specifically designed for early childhood centers. As such, it is important for us to address topics that matter to our customers. Now, let me introduce our speakers, Dr. Sarah Rogers, CEO and founder of EYE and Quest, with over 25 years of experience in the education sector at a senior level in the UK and overseas. Sara established EYE and later Quest to enhance the quality of education in both early childhood and primary sector. Sara is a hands-on and proactive CEO who not only manages the daily operations of the company, but also actively contributes to the industry. She is a frequent guest speaker at major educational events and conferences in the region, and she provides a number of continuing CPD courses. Next, we have Michelle Blackwood, General Manager at EYE and Quest. Michelle started her work with children in early childhood as a physical development program leader with her local council in Scotland. During this time, she spent considerable time in nursery settings and became interested in classroom practices and child development. This led her to retain as an early years practitioner. Over the last 15 years, Michelle has held senior teaching positions and management roles in nursery settings in Thailand and the UAE. And now we have introduced our speakers. Please note that this webinar will last for about 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. And if we don't have time to answer all your questions, we will try to answer them via email. Please share your, I can see that you are already sharing a lot of your thoughts, and you can share with us where are you coming from, and if you are a practitioner in a daycare center, share the name of your centers. Dr. Sarah and Michelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nadine, and good afternoon to everybody. And like Nadine said, very much welcome from Michelle and myself to you all over the world. We're very, very pleased to have you with us, and we're very, very pleased that early years is so important to you, that you spend your time with us this afternoon. Michelle and I have prepared a short talk for you, and as usual, we've probably got so much in the talk, I don't know if we'll get through it all. So, but anyway, we look forward to your comments, and as Nadine said, we'll try and answer any questions at the end too. So, okay. So today's webinar, we're going to focus on, as we always do, the best outcomes for every child. But today we're talking about, as Nadine said, the art and science of child development, and how we can make sure that children develop to their very, very best and thrive in the environment. So Michelle will talk you through the stage theory of childhood, and we'll talk about children as active learners, how we can support that as well, and what children need. And then Michelle and I will go through the different areas of child development and how to promote each one, and give you just a short taster of some ideas to keep at the front of your mind when you're working with children. And as ever, we're going to celebrate the joy and wonder of early years teaching. You really are the most important people in the education system. What you do makes a huge difference to children, both now and in the future, and a huge difference to families as well. So thank you very much for spending your time with us, and enjoy the rest of the webinar. So as I said, we want the best outcomes for every child, and wherever they live, whatever their background, whatever their culture or their language, we want to be able to promote and enhance the health, well-being and capacities of all children as well. So to do that, we need to make sure that children are supported and fulfilled, both in terms of their well-being now and their well-being in the future. And it's really, really important to us that children are looked after and cared for by knowledgeable adults. So knowledgeable adults really make a difference to the environment, both the physical and the emotional environment they give to children as well. There's a lot of pressure on children, and there's pressure on parents for children to grow up really quickly. And we want children to enjoy their childhood and not to rush through it. I was talking to another colleague a few days ago, and she said early years education is not a luxury, and that really resonated with me as well. It's something that's so important to every child to have the best start in life, to make sure that every child thrives, whatever their background, whatever their circumstances, and you can make a big difference to that. Next.
Yeah. So as Sarah's mentioned, then as early years educators, we play such an important role in children's development, and it is really, really important that we get it right. And one of the very best ways, which I believe that we can do that, is by understanding child development and what is appropriate for different children at different stages of their development. So when we think about child development, it can be described as the way in which a child grows and changes over a period of time. And that's with regards to their brain, to their body, to their different abilities and tasks that they're learning, but also to their behaviour. And as they go through child development, each of these things will become more complex. So when we talk about child development, we refer to typical milestones or typical patterns of development that children go through. And these are the stages, so something like crawling, standing, walking, running. So these would be typical milestones that we would see. And there are often different ages linked to these as well. But what we do have to remember is that while we can be guided by these typical patterns of development, we have to remember that every single child is unique, and the way in which they learn, the way in which they grow, and the way in which they develop will be unique to them, and we have to keep that in mind as practitioners.
As Michelle said, every child is unique, and what we need to remember and what we need to be knowledgeable about is that this development of theirs is very much a continuous, dynamic and interrelated So different areas of learning are going on at the same time, and one area of learning will affect another area of learning as well. And although children do follow milestones, as Michelle just said, they may come to those milestones at different rates. And there'll be things that influence how fast they reach those milestones. And these are things such as the internal influencing factors. So physical factors of the child, the psychological factors, social, cultural, and spiritual. So all of the environment around a child as well, not just the physical environment, but the emotional environment too, the support that the child gets, the understanding that they get at any particular stage will make a big difference to their development as well. We assume that many people understand how young children develop and the milestones they go through. But there's a lot of different information out there. Maybe parents and maybe practitioners are looking at other children around and comparing them. Maybe they're comparing them to their own childhood, their own children as well. And there's lots of different reasons why people don't always get it right. So the more we know about what's right for every child, the better it can be. Parents and family are a huge influence on young children. And I don't think parents always realise that the role models that they are for children and how what they do affects the child as well. So we often see or hear parents saying, oh, they don't learn until they go to school, and they don't understand that those very first early experiences have a huge effect on the child. So as well as the family have an effect on the child, as the child grows, peers have an effect on the child. So the child learns from those around them as well. They learn, they interact, they learn to socialise. I'm going to talk about the different areas of development in just a moment, but they all have a huge impact on the child. So if we have lots and lots of time, we talk about society, government, environment, and culture. One of the theorists, Bronfenbrenner, talks about the ecosystem and how children develop and are influenced by a wide range of different systems, basically. So all of these things are good to take into account when we're thinking about why children are unique. So as I just said, it's very, very different things, but we do understand that some of it is inherent in the child as well. So some of it is for their genetic makeup, and some of it is from nurture, what goes on around them as well. I don't know, I can't see the chat, I'm just going to flick onto the chat as well. What do you think? Is it more nature or nurture? What do you think is more responsible for children's development, or is it a balance? I wonder if I can just have a look at the chat, if you can just share that with me, because it's nice to be interactive. So do we think it's nature, ladies, or nurture?
It's balance. We have the balance, nature,
okay.
Balance.
Yeah.
So
nature.
Yeah. Nature,
balance.
nurture more than nature. Okay. Both nature and nurture. Okay. Good.
Nature and nurture, both in a balanced manner.
Okay, good. Okay.
Amazing.
It's a balance, I think. I thank you for those comments. It's lovely to know you're out there and you're listening as well. That's really, really nice, taking part in it. For me as well, you're absolutely right, it is a balance, but nature is very, very strong. And we can certainly see children following in, that we talk about children following the footsteps of their parents or being similar to their siblings, but absolutely it is nurture as well. So it is the environment, the physical and the emotional environment that children get. It has a huge impact in them reaching their full potential. So it's really, really important from the start that all the adults around the child are aware of their role as well. And part of our role is to support parents to understand this dynamic, interrelated and continuous process of child development. And that means not comparing one child with another child. That means not comparing a sibling with another sibling, for instance, but allowing all children to be independent and autonomous while growing to their full benefit as well. Okay. So I'm back to you, Michelle, please.
Okay, so when it comes to children's development, we have to remember that no one else can have experiences for the child. They have to be able to do this for themselves. And when we think about children in the early years, especially those children from birth to 2 years, they very much learn through what we call sensory motor experiences. So very hands-on experiences where they're touching, where they're smelling, where they're doing, where they're exploring. So all of these different senses are very much how children in the early years will learn. What we also have to remember is that children learn from the people around them as well. So children will learn by watching, they will learn by copying, they will learn by imitating what others around them are doing. And we also have to make sure as practitioners that we are demonstrating how to get involved in play. So we don't always have to, and often we have lots of discussions with some of our learners and with nursery practitioners, that they always feel that they have to be formally teaching children something, but that's not the case at all. And children will watch what we are doing as we join in and we play alongside them. So it's not often it's about sitting down on the carpet with children and them listening, because that is not the most effective way for children in the early years to learn, but it is much more about them doing and being involved in their learning. So when we think about children being active learners, it is very much about also giving children space and time to explore what is around them and let them experiment with it. Let them discover what it is before we step in and support that as well.
Thank you, Michelle. And as I was listening to you just then, I was thinking about that social learner and how you were saying that children learn from their senses. And I was lucky enough to be in a school today with some 3 and 4 year olds, and that the teacher had given them, they were talking about the gingerbread man and pancakes, and she had given them a tray each of flour, and they literally were adding water to the flour to try to make a pancake mixture. So the learning that was going on, and it was probably much, much more than the teacher planned, because one of them had added enough flour, and it was so sticky in her hands that she was pulling her fingers apart, and this sticky dough was on her fingers. And another child had added the amount of water that made it very smooth, and he was kind of like almost writing in it. And the joy and awe and wonder on their faces as this solid and this liquid mixed together in different parts and produced in different ways was so wonderful to see. So as Michelle said, it's not always about we've got to plan formally to do things. Quite often we've got to put the environment there so children can discover things for themselves. And we've got to watch and see their reactions and be open to extending those reactions as well. So definitely active learners, and as Michelle said, they learn from all around them. And those 2 children were learning from each other as they watched the different substances and how they were developing. And their curiosity as to how their friend had a different substance to them was lovely to see. So one of the joys of early years teaching, get my fingers into that today. So that was well. Okay, so there are 5 areas of child development. And we make assumptions that everybody knows these areas, and we make assumptions that practitioners know these areas, and we make assumptions that parents know these areas. And it is important to know the areas so we can best know how to support the child as they go through those milestones, as they grow in the different areas. So I'm going to tell you the 5 areas, because when I sometimes ask it before, some people get mixed up, for instance, with curriculum areas. So if you're following the EYFS, I might say to somebody, well, what are the 5 areas of child development? And they might get mixed up with the curriculum. So for instance, if you do follow the EYFS or any other curriculum, and there's probably more similar than there is different about it, they are curriculums that have been put together by knowledgeable people, by theorists, by practitioners, who think that this is a really good way of developing these areas of child development, the whole child. And although we are talking about the different areas, we have to remember that development is holistic. So as I said earlier on, when one area of development might go ahead. So if a child is talking to their friends, there's their language that's being developed, there's their social that's being developed, and maybe their physical as they're playing with something as well. So just to remind us, the 5 areas are physical development, language development, cognitive, which some people might know as intellectual development, social and emotional. And social and emotional go hand in hand. So again, they're often talked about together. So what we're going to do this afternoon is just spend a little bit of time going through those 5 areas. Michelle's going to talk about physical in quite depth, because that has a big impact on children. And when they become more able in one area, that has an impact and a knock-on, a positive effect in another area as well. And so we're going to talk about the different areas, and then we're going to talk about how to support each area.
Okay, so moving on to physical development, and I promise I will try to keep this as straightforward as possible. This is my area of passion, so I can talk about this for a long, long time. So when we think about physical development, we're thinking about how children grow, so physical changes that they go through, so things like their height, their weight, the size of their feet, the size or the length of their arms, their legs, their body, but also about their development across gross and fine motor skills, which I will go into a little bit more on the next slide. So essentially, it is about how they are gaining control over their physical actions, so that these actions become more complicated and much, much more skillful. So when we think about physical development, we often do think about it only in terms of gross and fine motor development, but we also have to remember that also includes things like balance, agility, coordination as well, because these are hugely important skills for children. Also, when it comes to physical development, we talk about children learning through their senses. And we are most probably very familiar with 5 senses, but in actual fact, there are 8 senses that we have to think about when it comes to physical development. Okay, so typically we will think of touch, taste, smell, seeing and hearing, okay, and those will be the 5 senses we're hopefully all very familiar with, okay, but we also have what we call 3 hidden senses, okay, and these are hugely, hugely important when it comes to children's development, especially their physical development. So the first one that I'm going to mention is what we call vestibular development, okay, and this is all to do with the motion that comes from our inner ear, okay, so as the fluid moves in our ear, it gives signals throughout our body, and this vestibular system is actually the part of our body that gives us most sensory input, and what it tells us is what our body is doing. So are we moving? Are we still? Are we upright? Are we upside down? Okay, and it is really, really important for children to be able to develop their vestibular system, because their vestibular system is really important for things like hand-eye coordination, okay, which has an impact on literacy, writing, and everything that I will talk about when we do communication as well. The next one we need to think about is our proprioceptive system. Okay, so our body is covered in millions of receptors. Okay, and when we often think about our senses, we only ever think about the senses in our hands. But when we are giving children sensory experiences, we should be trying to use our whole body in order to do that. So our proprioceptive sense is hugely important because it tells us where our body is in space, okay? So if I asked everyone to close their eyes and move their fingers together, okay? So everyone give that a go, okay? And is that easy for us to do as adults? Some people.
I was okay.
I have my nails on, so it's
But generally for us as adults, it's easier for us to do, also depending on how quickly or how slowly we do it, because we know where our body is in space, okay? In the same way that if we were going to pick up a glass, okay, I've not got any water in it just in case, okay, but I don't always have to be looking at that to know the distance it is away from me and the reaction to move that to my lips. Sometimes our proprioception can be off and we do spill it down our front, okay, but children also need lots and lots of opportunities in order to be able to do that. And proprioception, again, is later important for things like writing, because it helps children to understand how much pressure they need to put on the pen or pencil. It's also hugely important for things like feeding themselves or for dressing themselves as well, because their body needs to know what is happening in space. It's then later important For children also being able to play sports, okay, so using tennis rackets, using footballs and so on. And the final one that we're going to think about is interoception. So just as the proprioceptors are receptors on the outside of our body, our interoceptors are things that are internal. And our interoceptors will tell us if we're hungry, if we're thirsty, if I need to go to the bathroom. So all of these signals in our body are hugely, hugely important. And they also have a big impact on how children can manage their emotions and their feelings as well. Okay, sorry, Sarah, I've talked about that one for a while.
No, that's great. And the proprioception explains why young children often stand on my feet, doesn't it? Because they don't know where they finish and I start. Always bumping into things. So, okay.
And often just talking about proprioception as well. So our children that are wrigglers, our children that are constantly moving, or if they're lying on their tummies and they swing their legs back and forward and behind them, it's often because they're trying to get a sense of where their body is in space. And for some children, the reason that they can be scared of the dark is because once they are in the dark, they can no longer see their body, and it's quite difficult for them to be able to map it out. So proprioception is hugely, hugely important. Okay. So coming back into the areas we know when it comes to physical development, and this is about the development of our gross and fine motor skills. Okay, so the development of our gross motor skills are hugely, hugely important. And these are skills that require movement of the whole body. Okay, so things like walking, running, throwing, anything where our body is moving or balancing. Okay, and this is especially important as well for our core stability. And gross motor skills are hugely important because they're essential for everyday tasks that children do. Okay, so playing requires good development of our gross motor skills. Okay, also things like dressing ourselves when we have to balance on one leg to put our trousers on or our shorts on, but also getting up in the morning and getting out of the bed requires our gross motor skills. We also talk about fine motor skills, which is anything to do with the muscles in our fingers, our hands and our wrists. Okay, so again, things like dressing ourselves, eating, also lots and lots of activities like threading. Okay, playing with Play-Doh is a really good way to improve our fine motor skills. And later on, that will also tie into writing as well.
And that's why young children like playing with their food, isn't it, as well? Because that's them using their senses and their fine motor skills. So that's a good one too.
Okay. So what we really, really have to remember is that gross motor skills need the opportunity to develop before the fine motor skills can. Okay. And if we think about a very young baby, okay, they will start by developing those big skills, first of all, before it comes down to those fine motor skills. So with babies, they will often, or they do, gain control of their head, first of all, and their neck. And then what they will start to do is develop their control from the center of their body, so that trunk area. And the last thing that they develop is control of their fingers. Okay, and that is a typical pattern of development for children. So we have to remember that the gross motor skills are hugely important for development. And often if we think about even something simple like using scissors, okay, we often think that that is very much a fine motor skill, okay? But if children do not have good core stability, if they don't have control, okay, and stability in their shoulder and their elbow, then that movement of cutting with the scissors is quite difficult. And this is often why you see children cutting with their arm way up here, okay? It's because they don't have that control or that stability in their gross motor skills. What we also sadly know from my perspective, okay, is that children are a lot less active than they were in previous years. And we know from research that approximately 40 million children around the world under the age of 5 are classed as overweight or obese, okay, and that is terrifying. And we know that while there are lots of varying reasons for that, one of the main reasons for that is due to a lack of movement in their early years. Okay, so we know there is a huge increase in screen time. We know that parents are concerned about safety of children when they're playing outdoors and so on. So we have to make sure that children get lots and lots of opportunities to encourage them to promote their gross motor development, especially, and their fine motor development, in order to lead more active lifestyles when they are in our settings. And we know that poor physical development in young children really does have a big impact on their readiness for school, but also when it comes to their behaviour and their social development. And in a recent study, it was discovered that 60% of children going into primary school in the UK at age 5 did not have the expected physical skills at the expected level of development, and that made their transition into school much, much more difficult.
And that's an amazing amount, isn't it? Amazing amount of children who are already disadvantaged at a young age through something that we think we just take for granted as well, that they're going to get enough physical exercise.
And it is often one of the areas of learning and development that we do take for granted, because we do think children will just naturally do it, but we have to make sure that we are providing the opportunities for them to do this. Okay, so when it comes to physical activity, we're looking for children to be able to engage in aerobic exercise, so where they are out of breath, they're using their heart, they're using their lungs, they're using their cardiovascular system, but also any types of physical activity that encourage children to strengthen their muscles, their bones and their joints. Okay, and by this, I don't mean the children are lifting weights, okay, but this is things like them crawling, like them climbing, all of those weight-bearing exercises for children as well, and activities.
And these are hugely enjoyable for children, aren't they? This is what children should be doing. They should be being outside and doing these things.
Okay, so when it comes to physical development, there are recommended daily time frames that children should be active for in order to lead an active and healthy lifestyle. Okay, and this also does apply to the babies in our care, or if you're parents yourself, this also does apply to your babies as well. So we really should be encouraging babies to be active throughout the day. Okay, so whether this is time spent lying on their backs, where they're kicking their legs, where they are free to move, and very young babies will just do that because it is enjoyable. It is nice to move around and get a sense of where their body is. So we should be encouraging children to reach and grasp, but also encouraging them to pull up, and also having lots and lots of supervised floor play time, okay? And as much as we possibly can, we should avoid putting children into things like high chairs, into car seats, into prams when they are in our settings, because these things restrict movement and they stop children from being physically active. What we should also really be encouraging children to do is have 30 minutes of tummy time per day. Okay, this is not all in one go, and for some children they really do not enjoy tummy time, but we have to persevere with it. Okay, so just short bursts of tummy time throughout the day, and these are really important because it does really help children to strengthen their core, their neck, and across their shoulders as well. And that then later becomes important for skills like crawling as well.
Thank you. And you can hear, as Michelle is talking, all the things that she's saying, and these are things that are nurturing. They're nurturing the best possible outcomes for every child.
Okay, so when it comes to toddlers then, so our children from our walkers, so when we talk about this age group, so once children are walking, okay, and are moving into that toddling stage, so typically until 3, children should be active for at least 3 hours per day, okay, 180 minutes per day. And this should as well be spread out throughout the day. So I'm not saying to let them go and run around for 3 hours, because children do not have the cardiovascular system to be able to do that. Some of them might think they do, but it is not built for that. Children are built for short bursts of energy. Okay, so this could be lots of things like outdoor play. It could be action songs that we are doing in the classroom. Okay, but also very simply, It can just be encouraging children to do activities standing up, okay, or lying on their tummies. And something that I did in my nursery, because I don't believe children should be sitting down for long periods of time, is I got rid of all the chairs out of the classroom. So if children didn't want to stand up to play, they could lie on their tummy, they could sit down on the floor, but rather than being stuck to a chair, okay, they were allowed to play in whichever way they felt most comfortable. Okay. And then moving into the 3 to 5 year age range, sorry Sarah, thank you, they should also be active for 3 hours, so 180 minutes per day. Okay, the only difference here is that 60 minutes, so 1 hour of those 3 hours, should be at a moderate to vigorous intensity. Okay, so children's heart rate should be up. Again, not in 1 full hour. Okay, so there should be short bursts throughout the day where children are able to do that. And these are hugely, hugely important. I am just going to say one more thing here before we move on to the next slide. Okay, so I just mentioned sitting down at chairs. Okay, sitting is one of the hardest things that we can ask, or sitting still is one of the hardest skills that we can ask children to do. Okay, because in order to sit, children need to have good core stability. They also need to have good proprioception in that they can sit still, okay, and they're not wriggling around and moving around, but they also need to have good levels of concentration to be able to focus on what is going on. And often when children's concentration, often when their core and things are starting to get a little bit fed up, okay, that's when you will start to see them wriggling. Okay, so sitting still is a very difficult task for young children. So how do we promote physical activity through the day? In lots and lots of different ways. If you can, I know in some of the regions where we live, it is starting to get really, really hot. But if you can, get children outside every day. First thing in the morning, it is still cool enough for them to be running around and playing outside. Okay, but let's also try to include lots of action songs into our day-to-day. So movement breaks for children are hugely, hugely important. Okay. Again, for our physical, our fine motor skills, so things like Play-Doh, things like cutting, drawing, tearing, all of these things are hugely, hugely important. And you can also encourage children at home, so get parents involved with everyday tasks. So things like getting children to sweep up. Okay, if they spill sand out of the sand tray, encourage them to help you with that. They love doing things like that. Wiping down the tables after snack time, get them to help with that. They love doing that as well. They like to be helpful. But it is all really, really important for their physical development. Thank you, Sarah.
Okay. Oops, next slide. So thank you very much, Michelle. And that's a lot of great information about physical development, and that impacts hugely on the social and emotional development of a child as well. So as a child learns that they become more independent, as they learn that they can do things and they can, so the child that can sit down and then the child that learns to move around has a huge impact on their social and emotional development. So social and emotional development are two separate areas of development, but as we speak about them together because they often go hand in hand and they impact a lot on each other. So social and emotional development include the child's growing understanding and control of their emotions, which is a huge, huge thing. And they also begin to identify what others are feeling and develop the ability to cooperate, show empathy, and use moral reasoning as well. But we should be very, very careful that we don't expect children to develop these things before they are ready. We've already talked about the importance of good role models, and this is a huge impact on children in this area of the role models of the people around them, and understanding what it is like to be a young child, to be frustrated, to start to understand what you can do and you can't do. So they really do need knowledgeable adults around them who are very calm and patient and understand what they need at any particular time. So it's all about those relationships, the emotional relationships, and all children need to be securely attached. And being securely attached means having that emotional, trusting relationship with that special adult or adults, and understanding that you are loved and looked after. And that loving, caring relationships are hugely important to a child, to understand that they do mean something and they are important. And children will look at the adults around them and they will take their cues from the adults around them. And if adults are kind and caring and calm, the child is much more likely to be kind and caring and calm to others around them as well. So it's very important. As children develop their social emotional skills, they'll obviously start to interact with more around them. So to begin with, they will play alongside other children. So when we get our youngest children in nursery together, we will find that they are very much solitary learners. They are learning on their own. And I don't mean solitary in the fact that they don't interact with people, but they're very much concerned about what they are doing. And gradually they will learn to have some parallel play. So gradually they will learn to play alongside other children and be more aware of what they are doing. One of my least favourite sayings in nursery is, sharing is caring. And for a young child, that is very, very difficult to talk about sharing. And it is not a sign of caring or otherwise. And adults quite often say, don't share your food, for example, and don't do things like that. And then they expect the child to have this sharing and caring. Children are very egocentrical. They're very concerned with themselves when they are younger, and that is perfectly normal and very much part of finding out who they are and what they can do. So we wouldn't expect children to start sharing. Well, I could ask you the question of when you would expect children to start sharing, but we wouldn't expect children to start sharing properly until really maybe 3 or even 4. But it very much depends on the context. If the child is an only child and they don't have to share at home, they've got lots of adult attention, and they may not be able to so readily to share in nursery. If they've got lots of siblings at home and they're used to sharing, or they've come into childcare quite early, maybe they'll share a little bit earlier. But it also depends on what they are sharing. So if you ask them to share their favourite toy, they won't want to do that. But if you ask them to share something they're not worried about, then they'll be quite happy to do that. So all of these things take time, and all of these things take understanding as well from the adults around them. And what adults really, and we're going to talk about brain development and cognition in development in just a moment, but just while we're talking about social emotional, the brain, as the brain develops, has a huge impact on the way that children are sociable and the things that they will do in their emotions. And Michelle spoke a few minutes ago about the understanding when you're feeling hungry and when you're feeling tired. And we know that when young children have physical needs like hunger and tiredness, then they're not able to control their emotions in the same way. They're highly connected. So if you ask a child to do something when they're hungry or when they're tired, you know you're not going to get the best response out of them as well. So children are very, very individual, but also on a day-to-day basis, they might react to the things going on around them as well. So I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said their children were very, very noisy and very, very physically wanted to be out and about. And it might just be something as a change in weather. So their emotions change hugely. And this obviously affects on their social ability as well to interact, whether they're in the right mood to interact as well.
Sorry, Sarah, can I just... just add in here just while you're talking. So we mentioned interoception as part of physical development, and you've just mentioned it again here. But interoception is hugely important when it comes to children's social and emotional development, because again, when children can start to recognize their feelings internally, so I'm starting to feel angry because I can feel my body tensing up, I can feel my face starting to get hot. This also helps children to be able to manage their emotions and also manage their behaviour if we as supportive adults help them to recognise those feelings and those emotions. So it's just to show how physical can also tie in here as well. Sorry, Sarah.
No, it's good. And it has a physical reaction in the fact that when they do get upset or worried or afraid, then cortisol, so one of the many hormones that we have in our body, cortisol sets off an alarm. It says to them, something is not right, let's do something about it. And so cortisol will flood the brain, and the child will be maybe, you'll see a very teary child or a very upset child. They're not misbehaving. It is they're reacting to the physical signals in their body that something is not right. And it's nature's way of saying to us, do something, either get out of this situation or go to somebody who cares about you or get help and support as well. So it is hugely important that when children are going through emotional upset or distress, that the reassuring adult is around them and actually helps them calm down. And Michelle just talked about that physical reaction in the body. We as adults know that when we get upset, we may have a feeling in our stomach or butterflies or a heavy stone in our stomach. And it's really important to us to either take deep breaths or take some time out to actually control our emotions. So I can't understate how much our physical and our emotions feed off each other as well. So I'm just very aware of the time here, so I could talk about this lots as well. So it's really important that children do have all those positive role models around them, but that they are seen very much as individuals and that they will develop at different rates, and that some days they might be having a good day and feel very sociable, and other days they might want to just have a quiet day and do something different with their main care as well. So it's very important as adults, as knowledgeable adults, that we give each day as a fresh day to children and to see what they need today. Obviously, I've gone ahead of brain and Crusoe's role on this one. That we understand what the child needs today. And a lot of their social emotional development is much, much better when it's done outside, when they are running around, when they are physical, when they are able to use their energy up as well. Too many things that we do with young children today, as Michelle has already said, are about sitting down, are about asking them to do things which are more suitable and easier for adults to do as well. So having those reasonable expectations of a child, understanding what they're going through, understanding it is just a phase of what they need now is hugely important. If you've ever met an adult who cannot control their temper, who gets very upset over things, seemingly fairly small things, or gets very worried, so a lack of resilience, who gets worried about things very quickly and gets down very quickly, all of those can be linked to, all of those emotions and learning patterns can be linked to the child and how the child, how the adults around the child were with the child in the early years. So if we want children to become resilient, if we want them to have a good sense of well-being and a good sense of themselves, we really have to promote that in the early years. And just before I move on to the next area, just be very, very careful of labelling a child. So as we said, children will be different on different days, depending on lots of different things as well. So although we want to help and support the child and recognise those stages we are going through, seemingly simple labels like terrible twos do not help anybody and certainly don't help that child. And all that child is doing, that 2-year-old child is doing, is just understanding their independence or their limits of their independence, and they are learning a huge amount. So, they are going to be times when they can't control what's going on, or they don't understand it, when they are frustrated. So it's much better to have labels, if you're going to use labels, like terrific twos rather than terrible twos. So just to be aware of that.
Okay, so moving into language development, we have to remember that language development isn't only about speaking, okay? It does involve speaking, but it is also about children being able to listen. It's about children being able to understand and comprehend what is being said to them. But it also involves lots of non-verbal communication as well. So things like gestures, eye contact. Children have to be able to learn to read those signals as well, because when they do, they find it much easier to link that to their emotional development, for example, because if they can see that a child is frustrated with them and they can read that body language, they might know to step away from it or whether to react to it if that's what the cortisol in their brain is telling them to do. So we must remember that children are born communicators. Babies communicate from the moment they arrive into this world, and they do so through crying, okay? And then children's language development develops tremendously over the first 5 years, okay? And it is a hugely vital part of their overall holistic development. Sarah's going to talk about cognitive development in just a couple of moments, but we know that cognitive development and language development go hand in hand, because when children are able to understand different words, different vocabulary, it helps them to process their thinking. And children will often verbalize their thinking, and they talk about what they are doing to help them to understand that as well. When it comes to language development, we know that that follows a typical pattern of development, but what we have to keep in mind is that it will take up to about 7 or 8 years of age before children are grammatically correct in their speech, okay, and they are fluent in their speech. So in the early years, children may have very good vocabulary levels, but they might still make errors when they are communicating with you and talking to you, okay? And that is fairly common. So I used to have a little girl in my class who used to tell me, I can do it by my own self, Miss Michelle, rather than I can do it by myself. So I can do it by my own self. What we also have to remember, and something that I've seen a lot of over my time working in the Middle East and in Southeast Asia, is that lots of parents in these regions have very high expectations that their children read and write very quickly, and often in the early years as well. But what we have to remember is that language is the foundation of reading and writing, okay? And if children cannot, or if children do not have the vocabulary, they will find it difficult to say a sentence. And if children find it difficult to say a sentence, they will really find it difficult to be able to write down and understand a sentence as well. So we have to remember that language development is hugely important. And children will only develop strong language skills when they are exposed to rich language environments with lots and lots of opportunities to listen, to learn and extend their vocabulary, and to talk, okay? Talking is hugely important in the early years. So, sorry, Sarah, can you just move on to, thank you. Okay, so we really cannot underestimate the importance of language development, okay? And there are so many simple ways in which we can do that in our classrooms. Our classrooms should never be completely silent, okay? So often we still hear at snack and lunch times practitioners saying to children, okay, we must be quiet because we're going to eat our food, okay? Yes, the classroom is not going to be crazy with children running around everywhere when it's snack or lunch time, but that's such a good way to promote language and communication, just by having conversations with the children or allowing them to have conversations with one another during those times, and it can build their vocabulary as well. We as adults should also role model listening, okay? As adults, we're often very good at talking to children, but we're not so good at listening to them. So we really have to demonstrate that to children if we also want them to be good listeners. And really just lots and lots of opportunities. So stories, rhymes, action songs, just simple activities like sand, water play, Play-Doh, all of these activities can really promote children's language development. I'm just very conscious. Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, last but not least, and as we keep referring to, Michelle and I keep referring to, all of these areas are related, and cognitive development or intellectual development, as you might know it, is a hugely important one. And sometimes it's not quite as visible as physical development. So people don't always understand it so well, or don't understand the levels the children are going through. So this is about the brain developing, and this a lot of this has to do with the nurture, with the stimulation. For children to learn, for their brains to grow and develop, they need to be stimulated. So a baby is born with a brain about a third of the size of an adult brain. And we know that we have two sides of a brain. It's quite interesting when I ask learners to draw a brain, what they think a brain looks like. But a baby's brain is quite smooth. There's space in the head, the fontanelle at the top of the head, where the skull is not completely formed, because as the baby grows and develops and learns, their brain grows and develops and gets bigger, and then starts to kind of like overlap onto itself. So all those synapses are firing, and they fire when children are stimulated, and we need to give children stimulating environments. And then on the other hand, I'm going to say we also we need to give children calm environment as well. So they need times of peace and quiet as well. But they need to learn through those 5 senses that Michelle talked about, or the 8 senses that Michelle talked about, really. So children are developing their brain every day. And the more often they repeat things, the more hardwired some experiences become. So things that they don't need to, the brain prunes them off, but things that they are very important to them, that they do again and again and again, and children need time to practice and develop and try out things and make mistakes and learn. The more the brain then becomes hardwired, and children, the more information they get, the more stimulated they get, the more the brain develops and the more they want as well. So it's a really good positive circle as well. And we can see that children who get the right the right nurture really can thrive in those early years. So they develop cognitively and they start to gain the ability to process those thoughts. And what we're trying to do is get children to self-regulate, so to be aware of their own emotions and aware of their own feelings, and obviously be able to control those as well. So just as Michelle said, language is hugely important, because they might read the body language of a child or an adult as well, and start to make those connections and start thinking for themselves. So regulate themselves and within their peer group as well. And what we want children to do is we want children to learn how to think independently. We want them to learn how to process information and decide which information is important and which information is pertinent. We talked right at the beginning about the importance of education young children for now and in the future. And one of the things, I was talking to a nursery owner last night, and we were talking about all the information that's out there at the moment, and how important it's going to be as our children grow and develop, not to be able to find out facts, because those facts are always there, but its ability to actually think about how to use those facts and what to do with it. So it's really, really important that children learn to think for themselves, and the adults around them actually support their thinking through lots of talk. So it's through talk that children make their thinking visible, and we can help them do that. I'm very aware of the time, so I'm going to go through this very quickly, as Nadine's going to be going, oh my goodness. So I love the early years. It is such a wonderful time of awe and wonder, like those children playing together with something as simple as two different materials, a liquid and a solid, flour and water. So providing children with sensory activities in the world around them to really stimulate them. Role model by asking questions and thinking, puzzling over things and saying, oh, that's interesting. How about, what do you think? Allowing children to understand that it's okay to have a go, allowing children to understand that it's okay to make mistakes and try again, and that is how we learn. So that investigating and experimenting is really important. And for us as adults to recognise that we're co-learners, so to learn alongside of the child. Every child is unique and different, and we will learn from the child if we sit and listen and sit with them and talk to them as well. So that's really important. And I'm just going to finish on very, very quickly, because we're going to talk about risk in the next webinar as well. This balanced approach to risk. Children need to take a certain level of risk for the world to be stimulating. So Michelle's talked about scissors already, and I know some settings that don't let children near scissors because they're worried that children will cut the wrong things. With adult support, with adult help, children can take appropriate risks, and that's how they learn about their own abilities as well. So I think we're just going to finish off by saying, I don't know if Michelle wants to say anything else, but really do look for the joy and wonder. We are so lucky being early years practitioners. We do not have the same limits that our primary and our secondary fellow educators have. We can do lots and lots of different things with children to really, and if you're enjoying what you're teaching, then you'll be promoting the art of child development as well as the science of child development as well. Share what interests you, and they'll be interested too. They absolutely love doing what, as Michelle said, whether it's sweeping the floor, they love doing what grown-ups do. They love that as well. Please don't rush them through their childhood. Please support parents to understand that childhood is a hugely important stage in their own right, and parents need help with that. So be aware when children do need help, and we'll do another webinar about early intervention. but really to leave you with and with the thought that we are very lucky in early years. So make each day a new and exciting day and have fun with children. And that's how. Okay, Michelle, did you want to finish off with anything else?
I think the only thing that I would add there is play with children. I think often we as adults think that we've got to rush through everything in the day, that we sometimes don't just take a step back and just join in with their play. So that way we can really promote that joy, that curiosity, that awe and wonder as well by joining in and just having fun with the children. We're so lucky in what we do. We should enjoy it a little bit more, because we can become so bogged down with paperwork and children reaching milestones that we often forget the reason why we started doing this in the first place.
Yeah, thank you. I could go on for a lot more, but Nadine, I don't know if there's any questions.
Yes, we need to thank you everyone for staying with us, and I can see how much the amount of people on the chat room enjoyed the webinar, how insightful it was. If you have any questions, please, we do have the next 5 minutes for answering your questions. And as I mentioned, if we were not able to answer all the questions, we will try our best to reply to you via email. There is also, I found this meeting, it may be asked for available books. I believe we suggested some books in our previous webinar, Sarah, am I correct?
I think we did. We can certainly suggest some as well. So we can. So I think it's like anything. You learn so much from the people around you that sometimes, yes, that I think you should all have an excellent child development book that goes through the stages. I think you need one in your own nursery to remind you. But it is about just using your own, looking around you and seeing what's right for children as well. But we certainly can do that. I just saw somebody here, Diane said, as well as singing and dancing, they play happy pop songs too. So that's really good.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Is there any other questions? Brain break songs, movement helps children strengthen their muscle, definitely.
I did see a couple of comments, Sarah, earlier as well, just about activities that, as it's getting hotter, children can move indoors. There are lots and lots of different things that you can do. And I did see someone mentioned our CPD that we're doing next week. So if you are interested in that, just have a look on our website as well. But lots of the activities that we can do outdoors, we can adapt slightly to bring indoors, depending on the space that we have. And it might be that we just have to do that with smaller groups of children, but we can find ways around it. So we just have to be creative sometimes as well.
And that's part of being in early years, isn't it? Being creative. So somebody's put here, Tanyat, about show and tell and class mascots, and they are lovely, but I would just say be very careful. Michelle said about how difficult it is to sit down. Don't do great big long show and tell where everybody has to sit and wait for somebody else to have their turn. So keep it quite small, keep it quite short, maybe just have 1 or 2 people. And I think circle time, which is another whole issue in show and tell, is best done in small groups. The younger children, don't spend too long on the carpet at all. So
we can see as well, Robina, she's asking how to remove electronic gadgets addiction from children. It's about my son. He's 6 years old, turning 7 now. Can anybody help?
You know, that's hugely worrying to me to hear this. And it's not just her son, it goes across the board. And so many parents rely on these electronic gadgets as babysitters now. The World Health Organization does say that children under 2 should not have any gadgets at all. So they shouldn't be watching TV or anything. But I know we all use it, and there's no such thing as a perfect parent. I think it is about you realizing that you are the adult, you are in control, and making sure there are times when they don't rely on it, where you do take them outside to play, you take them to the beach or the park or the shops, and you spend some time with them as well. So be very clear to them why you're restricting it. It's interesting, a lot of schools use gadgets, but if you actually look at the main technology leaders, so the leaders in their field, like the leaders of Apple and things like that, they're actually restricting the technology for their own children. So they know it's not a good thing. So be brave, take control and say you can have it an hour a day or an hour and a half a day, but otherwise you need to be outside playing football or kicking a ball or doing a jigsaw or reading a book. Reading a book, that's a good one.
Even activities, any type of activities at a school, at a camp or something like that, that can be consistent as well for the children. that can take them away from the gadgets. This is from my own experience with my children as well. We have as well, is the study of child development a science? From Mara.
Is it a science? Yes, it is a science in the fact that we study child development and we look at different children, but we also understand, like any science, it's not absolute. We're always evolving it. We're always finding out more about how children learn. And for instance, we wouldn't have once upon a time taken into the idea that the cultural aspect of child development was important as well. So we know that cultures are hugely important. We know that the language is important as well, where children come from. So it is a science in the fact that it's evolving and we're learning more and more, but it's also an art, because you cannot read a book and apply it to a child. The child hasn't read that book. So you need to be very knowledgeable and pick the bits that are relevant for that child and interact with them in a relevant way. Would you agree, Michelle?
I would, and just on that as well, I think what we have to remember is a lot of the information that we have about how children learn comes from lots and lots of different theories of development. And we don't have to agree with every single one of those theories. Some of them you might think, okay, I can see that, how that can apply to some children. Others you will be a lot more drawn to as well. But I think what makes a good practitioner is understanding all of the different theories that are there and understanding their place, but also recognizing that they don't fit every single child that you have in your class.
Yeah, definitely. But thank you so much for joining us today. I can see Attica now, just had to say hello to her as well. But it is lovely to have that feedback, because it means as practitioners, we are lifelong learners and we are always striving to do the best for our children by learning from a whole range of theories. So thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Again, if I received any additional questions, we'll be communicating it with Michelle and Sara, and we'll do our best to get back to you. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day or the afternoon, and we see you during our next webinar. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.